right now, someone you know is being manipulated, not in some vague, mysterious way, not in a way that's impossible to measure, scientifically, through a system that was built, tested, optimized, and scaled for exactly this. And the strange part is, nobody had to lie to them to do it. Nobody had to trick them into clicking. Nobody even had to know their name. Because when you open a social media app, when you look at that feed, that endless scroll, it feels like you're looking at the world. You're not. You're looking at a prediction engine, a machine built to guess exactly what will keep your eyes on the screen for one more second, then one more, then one more. Hey everyone, I'm Karim Ali. Welcome back to Carmel's Voice. In this episode, we're not talking about who is behind this, not yet. We're talking about something more unsettling, how it works. Because once you understand the mechanism, you will never be able to unsee it. Here's the question we're actually answering today. How can an algorithm quietly replace your sense of reality without you ever noticing the substitution? Let's take the machine apart. And to understand any of this, you have to start with one number. Not a company, not a person, a number. Time on app. That's it. That's the core economic foundation underneath everything else. Social media platforms don't run on truth. They don't run on accuracy. They don't run on what's healthy for you. They run on capturing and holding attention. And attention converts directly into ad revenue. A platform does not profit when you open the app, feel satisfied, and leave. It profits when you stay. So somewhere buried under every other feature, every design choice, every notification, there's one driving mandate the whole algorithmic system is engineered to obey. Keep them here. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because keep them here is not a strategy, it's a target. And once you give a mathematically optimized system a target like that, it starts hunting for whatever hits it fastest. Not what's true, not what's good, just what works. And there's a reason that hunt did not take long to find its answer. Because your brain already has a switch built in. One that was never designed for a smartphone. It was designed for an ancient world with actual predators in it, which brings us to the moment the machine figured out how to flip that ancient switch. Imagine you're scrolling. You see two posts. One is a calm, careful breakdown of policy issues. The other is a headline that makes your stomach drop. Which one do you actually stop for? You already know the answer because your brain answered it before you finished hearing this sentence. That's not a character flaw, that's architecture. Your brain has an evolutionary threat detection system that prioritizes perceived danger before your conscious reasoning even shows up to the meeting. Cognitive scientists call this negativity bias, the hardwired human tendency for negative news, threatening stimuli, and alarming outcomes to grab our attention faster and hold it longer than positive or neutral data ever could. It kept your ancestors alive. Today, it keeps you scrolling. And the platforms did not have to understand evolutionary psychology to find this. They just had to track and measure what users engaged with. Researchers at MIT studied this phenomenon directly, tracking the structural diffusion of thousands of verified stories across Twitter. Over an 11-year period, they compared what independent fact checkers confirmed as true against what had been confirmed as false. The finding, published in the journal Science, was staggering in its consistency. Falsehood diffused scientifically further, faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth across all categories. In fact, false stories reach 1,500 people, about 6 times faster than true ones. 6 times, and the data revealed a critical twist. This was not being driven by automated bots. The researchers found that human users were the primary drivers, not because people sharing false stories are inherently careless or gullible, but because false stories are organically or intentionally styled to hit the brain's threat detection system first. A calm explanation has to be intellectually processed. A frightening headline does not. It just has to be filled. Fear and outrage move faster than facts, and the algorithm never had to intentionally choose fear to cause harm. It simply optimized for what performed and gave high arousal emotional content more room to run. But the algorithm does not do all the heavy lifting. The most brilliant part of this system is how it gets your own brain to finish the job for free. There is a foundational finding in cognitive psychology known as the illusory truth effect. The mechanism is simple. The more times your brain is exposed to a specific claim, the more inherently credible and true that claim starts to feel. Not because it has been factually proven, but because it has become deeply familiar. Your brain relies on cognitive fluency, an ancient, efficient shortcut that treats ease of processing and familiarity as a stand-in for accuracy. It is a fast, low-energy way to navigate information, but in a digital environment, it is wrong often enough to completely alter our perception. So picture what happens when a low credibility claim gets amplified. The first time you see it, you might be highly skeptical. The 10th time, it starts to feel oddly normal. The 15th time, you're not actively evaluating its merits anymore. You're just recognizing it. And recognition, to a tired brain scrolling late at night, feels identical to truth. There is a closely related psychological law, the mere exposure effect. Repeated exposure does not just make a claim feel factually true. It makes it feel familiar, comfortable, and safe, which means the recommendation engine is not merely shaping what you believe. By feeding your constant repetition, it is shaping what you're drawn to, what feels like your side, and what feels like home. None of this requires an overt lie. It only requires a strategic repetition. And repetition is the one thing an engagement machine is mathematically perfect at producing. So what happens when you layer these psychological effects together inside a digital feed? You end up building a room you did not even know you were standing in. Fear that moves fast, familiarity that mimics truth. Suddenly, a completely artificial reality begins to solidify. As you scroll, you start noticing that an overwhelming number of accounts seem to passionately agree with you. The same take, the same outrage, the same villain over and over. And your brain automatically processes that pattern through the lens of social proof, a deeply wired social assumption that if a vast crowd believes something, it is safe, valid, and correct to believe it too. Combine that with a network phenomenon that scientists call the majority illusion, a structural quirk where a tiny, highly active group of accounts can make a fringe position appear dominant and universal, and you develop an unshakable confidence. Not a confidence born from checking the facts, a confidence built on the feeling that everyone already knows this. But here's the invisible trap of the feed. You cannot see the structural walls of the digital room you're standing in. You cannot see what has been filtered out. You cannot see the entirely different version of the internet that your neighbor is looking at right now, which looks nothing like yours. The algorithm does not just serve your content. It places you inside a curated crowd. A crowd that already sounds like you, already mirrors your biases and reflects your beliefs back at you, but significantly louder, more polarized, and more emotional than you would ever express them yourself. This is the exact moment where your own confirmation bias quietly takes total control. You're naturally prone to click on, share, and remember information that validates what you already believe. The machine tracks that data instantly, down to the millisecond, so it dynamically feeds you more of exactly that, which makes your original belief feel even more confirmed, which makes you even more likely to engage with the next iteration. Round and round you go, a self-reinforcing feedback loop with no outside referee, tightening a little more with every single pass. Sociologists call this selective exposure. It is less rigid filter bubble you're forcibly pushed into, and more of a context-driven echo chamber you're actively helped construct, one click at a time, without ever making a conscious decision to do so. This is how we arrive at what researchers term acclamation truth. Something becomes accepted as true, not because it survived a rigorous factual investigation, but because it feels like the digital crowd has already universally accepted it. And once that psychological tipping point sits in, a claim does not need to win an argument or prove its facts anymore. It just needs to spread widely enough to look like consensus. But that raises an obvious question: who is actually generating all this consensus? You would assume it is a broad organic slice of the population, millions of ordinary people arriving at the same conclusions independently. The data says something much stranger. A landmark study published in the journal Science in 2024 tracked exactly this phenomenon on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Researchers mapping the landscape of political misinformation discovered that a tiny group of hyperactive users, known as super sharers, were responsible for spreading a staggering 80% of the fake news on the platform during the observation window. Out of a massive panel of over 660,000 users, just over 2,000 individuals were doing all this heavy lifting, roughly 1/3 of 1% of the population, generating 4/5 of the low credibility material. This is not a French finding either. Related research tracking the 2016 and 2020 US elections found a nearly identical pattern: a tiny fraction of accounts, a widely disproportionate share of misinformation. It shows up again and again in different years on different platforms, like a structural feature of the network architecture rather than a one-time accident. And a striking number of these accounts carried verification badges, blue check marks, a visual signal that's supposed to mean credible. The system was not just spreading unproven claims, it was actively amplifying them while wearing the badge of authority. Here's the network mechanism underneath that number. It does not take a majority to manufacture the feeling of a majority. It takes a small number of highly active accounts, an algorithmic feedback loop that rewards whatever performs, and enough repetition to trigger every human bias we just walked through. Fear that travels fast. Familiarity that feels like truth. A crowd that looks infinitely bigger than it actually is. That's the whole recipe. And it scales from a few hundred accounts to an entire information ecosystem, automatically, without a single new decision being made after the system is switched on. Yet everything we've talked about so far only works on populations. Broad patterns, aggregate behavior, millions of people nudged by the same handful of evolutionary biases, but the machine has a second gear, one that's not aimed at a crowd, it's aimed directly at you. In 2015, researchers from the University of Cambridge and Stanford University published a study that quietly changed how the world understood personal data. They did not analyze private message. They did not track search history. They used something almost embarrassingly simple: public Facebook likes. So the small throwaway thumbs up you leave on a song, a joke, a page, a headline. They fit that data into a personality model built around 5 core psychological traits known as the Ocean. Then they tested the computer accuracy against judgments made by people who actually knew the subjects: co-workers, friends, family, spouses. With just 10 likes, the model out-predicted a co-worker. With 70 likes, it out-predicted a close friend or a roommate. With 150, it out-predicted a family member. And with 300 likes, a number most active social media users hit without even noticing, the machine predictions came close to matching a spouse. Someone who lives with you, who watches your mood shift, who has seen you at your best and your absolute worst. 300 idle clicks, and a machine could build a psychological portrait that close. Now, stretch that idea across a platform with billions of users, each one leaving thousands of these tiny digital signals a year. And you're no longer looking at a research curiosity, you're looking at infrastructure. A system that does not just know what you clicked, it knows what moves you, what scares you, what you will protect instinctively before your conscious mind has thought it through. This is where psychological profiling stops being an abstract concept and becomes a behavioral targeting mechanism. Because once a system knows which emotional lever to pull in you specifically, whether you value tradition, order, fear, or identity, it does not need to persuade a crowd anymore. It can build a version of reality custom tailored to one single person. Researchers call this differential persuasion. Different messages quietly matched to different psychological profiles delivered to different people with no shared public room where anyone can compare notes. You never see what your neighbor is being shown. They never see what's been shown to you, which means the most important messages in modern political and cultural life might not exist anywhere you can easily point to. No public speech, no shared broadcast, no common transcript. Just a private signal sent to exactly the right nervous system at exactly the right moment. When you pull back and look at the whole picture, the true scale of what we've built in the last few minutes becomes undeniable. A business model with one core instruction: hold attention. A human brain with built-in evolutionary shortcuts that instruction can exploit for free. A network feedback loop that turns a tiny handful of supershares into the illusion of a massive majority. And a behavioral profiling layer precise enough to speak to one person's exact psychology invisibly at scale. None of it required a single lie to be told to you directly. None of it required you to be foolish or careless or uninformed. It only required an automated system that rewards whatever keeps you watching, and a human brain that was never built to defend against something this patient. But here's the question that should be bothering you right now. Systems like this don't assemble themselves. Someone decided that outrage was worth rewarding more than a calm explanation. Someone chose the financial metric that made fear more profitable than context. Someone built the profiling tools, and someone else decided to keep deploying them. We've not named any of them yet. Not the platforms, not the political campaigns, not the tech executives who saw the societal harm forming and chose not to slow it down. But that's not an accident, because before you can understand why they made these choices, you needed to understand exactly what the machine they built actually does. Now you know how it works. Next time, we name who's running this.